Okay, everybody, welcome. Hello. We are about to begin. Thank you very much. Welcome to tonight's event. My name is Richard Economakis. I'm a faculty member here at the School of Architecture. It's been a very busy day, I know, and we have especially been looking forward to tonight's event, this roundtable discussion on the Architectural Uprising. I'd also like to say a word on behalf of our Dean, Stefanos Polizoidis, who unfortunately, regrettably, is unable to attend because he's unwell, but he hopes to join remotely, even perhaps once we connect by Zoom. He extends his own warm welcome to you all and, of course, to our colleagues beyond the pond who will be zooming in. A footnote: if you wish to acquire AIA or continuing education credit, there are sign-up sheets at the top on the ground floor outside the theater. So just keep that in mind when you leave. I realize tonight is short and brief, and we have many interesting speakers we want to engage in questions. This will be an opportunity for some very interesting questions and answers. So I'm going to essentially pass the mic to my colleague, Lucien Steil, who will tell us more about tonight's event and the participants.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, in particular, thanks for people who are far away who are close to midnight. So really thanks for the idealism and their courage to attend. So we are very honored and excited to host this roundtable debate on Architectural Uprising, which is such a distinguished group of panelists, which I will introduce very shortly later. This is probably a remarkable premiere. It's really, I think, the first time this movement gets an academical acknowledgement, not only in the United States, but I think also Europe. What Joe tells me, in Europe, it has never passed the threshold of the academy, which looked down at it, and they kind of always suspect that it's kind of infiltrated with right-wing extremists. So this is an increasing, so the Architectural Uprising and Rebellion, how it's called, very dramatic names. It's an increasingly relevant movement of resistance and action against the uglification of the built environment. Our panelists will update and discuss in greater depth this extraordinary phenomenon. Here's just a short introduction of our distinguished panel. So João Gonçalo Batista, he's an architectural draftsman working in Porto with Alexander Gamelas. Alexander Gamelas is one of the 4 firms in whole Portugal doing classical architecture. So we know how lucky we are here in the United States, and just seeing the career fair, all this amazing amount of wonderful professionals who offer jobs and who do this kind of great work. That's a very, very unique and privileged situation, which is not the case in most of European countries. So João Gonçalo Batista, he will moderate this debate. And then we have Michael Diamant from Sweden. Michael has set up a comprehensive list, geographic, location, description of all new traditional architecture in Europe, I think, also everywhere.
And a lot of other places too.
In other places, wherever you can find them. So there's a really documentation of all the traditional projects, which is absolutely fantastic. He did it all by himself. He's working as a bank accountant or something. We have also Noé Morin, and unfortunately, Noé Morin, so Nadia Everett cannot attend for family reasons. Noé Morin and Nadia Everett has founded this remarkable association, which is called La Table Ronde de l'Architecture. And you know what La Table Ronde is? La Table Ronde is a group of knights, and they're fighting for a better world, a better built environment. They're offering summer schools, and they also now are handing the Prix Philippe Protier, which is something which is equal to the treehouse prize in Europe. It's a little bit, it's only $40,000, but it's kind of very important that this year it's dedicated to vernacular architecture. Marjo Jutila, she's from Finland Inpao, she's an architect. Victoria Schutz-Doba, she's an architect. She's coming. She's based in London, and she's German-French. She's a PhD candidate in what's called now the King's Foundation, that was formerly the Prince's Foundation. She also is a collaborator of Mark Wilson-Jones, who is a famous classical architect in London. Ruben Hansen from the Netherlands. He's an urban sociologist, psychologist, as a trained urban planner. He runs a web and a channel which is called Aesthetic City, and you should look it up because they're producing podcasts and they are doing very, very sophisticated work, popularizing and having also a growing impact on the traditional architecture movement in Europe and elsewhere. Colum, Mulhern, and Anne-Catherine Mulhern, they're architects from Luxembourg. Colum and Anne-Catherine work with, collaborate with Leon Trier, who's also from Luxembourg. And they are also representing a movement in Luxembourg. Luxembourg is this place where everything which is like, everything which is considered historic gets demolished. So there's a rage for demolition, and there's also rage for creating very, very bad and ugly modern architecture. And there's a movement which is called Wir willen hallen wat wir wollen. That means we want to keep what we have. So let's save the few things which are still left from a better period. Herewith, I hand the microphone over to João Gonçalo Batista, who will run this show, and we will ask some questions. So you input is very welcome, and so just really kind of let me help me to welcome João and the panelists in this wonderful event.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us here and online on the live stream. As Lucien said, I'm working as an architectural draftsman at Alexandre Gamelas and Catarina Santos, and we're based in Portugal. But my major is in art history. And before I started doing what I do now, that happened by chance. I worked during a whole year in the last stained glass workshop in my country. That kind of unification of the arts is something that we were talking just now, very rare, and that we should bring back. And that's one of the things the Architectural Uprising focuses on too. But enough about me. I'm going to just give you a small introduction of what the Architectural Uprising is before I hand it over to our guest speakers for their respective presentations. So excuse me just a bit, I'm going to read off a text I wrote. The Architectural Uprising, also known as Architectural Rebellion, is a people's movement that protests against the continued uglification of our cities. The movement disagrees with the blatant disregard from developers, architects, and politicians for the built environments, and advocates for beautiful, sustainable, and popular alternatives. The story goes back to 2014. It started as a Swedish Facebook group. That community now has over 62,000 members. And over the years, it has grown into various different national and countrywide chapters. For example, you have the whole of Scandinavia. You have other countries like Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Brazil. There's one in India. There's a US Western chapter, and there's also one in Portugal, which I started. I started the movement, which I stumbled upon after watching a video made by Ruben Hansen. He is here with us today in his channel, The Aesthetic City. And I'm guessing that a lot of other creators of their respective chapters was also due to that video. So just before handing over the metaphorical microphone again. Just a quick thing about how does the architectural uprising work, spread and grow. So it's a much more social media centered movement. Apart from the Swedish, Denmark, and Finland groups, which they have existed for longer, so they have a more physical and political presence too, as in media as well. But recently, the Amsterdam chapter also made a media appearance. The way we use social media is by creating a forum, public space for discussion, sometimes with controversial topics, before and after pictures, war-torn countries that suffered a lot of destruction during Second World War use a lot of those before and after images of once where there were beautiful, humane spaces, then became complete car-centric concrete jungles. Although that's a phenomenon that's a lot of mostly associated with America, that happens a lot in Europe as well. In my case, in Portugal, fortunately, we weren't struck by the devastation of a war. Well, we were struck by the devastation of the tabula rasa utopianism of modernism. So a lot of good things vanished, and now that our cities continue to grow, they're growing in the wrong direction, in an unsustainable direction. So I think we should pass the word to our speakers so they can introduce themselves, and then we follow along to the questions.
Should we start with some?
Yeah, yes, Mikael. His presentation is not showing his slides. There we go. Yeah, the floor is yours, Mikael.
That's the second slide. If you could just back it one slide back. Here we are. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for hosting this event. My name is Mikael Diamant, and as mentioned, I'm the founder of these two social media advocacy group, New Tradition Architecture and the Swedish Architectural Uprising. I founded these two groups around 10 years ago, and the reason that they are two is because they have a bit different approach. New Tradition Architecture is a project group that shows different projects from all around the world. And by showing these projects, one can discover what is happening in other countries. And we can also discuss the merits of the development, how traditional architecture is developing in different countries. The uprising movement, and specifically the Swedish Architectural Uprising movement, it's a local group or a national group with a focus on changing public discussion, what we allow ourselves to build and say about the built environment. Next slide, please. So the first question that these two groups try to address is, how do you create public interest for our built environment? There is a big interest for our built environment, and there has always been. But for the last decades, the public has been conditioned that there is a rational reason for all the ugliness of the modern world. And by showing positive examples how we can build, yes, we use, as mentioned, a lot of before and after, how you can create, positive examples, what we can do with our hands today. We want to create a public demand. And that's where the magic happens, because when the public asks for more traditional architecture, then suddenly there is opposition, but not from the public, but from the modernist establishment. So then people learn why we are not building beautiful today, and it's about ideology. Next slide. The second question that these groups address is how do you go beyond it should be done? It's very easy to talk about we should do this and do that. But to go further that, we do, as mentioned before, we show already built examples. Because in that way, you cut the Gordian knot, because the developers that built this, they didn't build this because of altruism. They built this new development to earn money. Also, about, the talk about craftsmen, apparently there were craftsmen because there's a lot of fine craftsmanship in this building. And finally, one question that it's often talked about, modern regulations. Well, this new bill that you see here, it fulfills all modern regulations. So by showing real built examples, you can surpass all these, discussions about that it's impossible, because if it was built, then it was possible to build this. Next slide. So this is just a very short presentation. So where are we now and where are we heading? Well, there has been exceptional growth of the uprising movement, and we exist now in more than 20 different countries. There are affiliations now in Latin America, and there are 2 smaller ones in North America. And there is also one in Australia and one in New Zealand. Also, there is one in India, Israel, and Turkey are the latest ones. So more of the same, because this is a very important mission to teach the public that all the ugliness of the modern world has nothing to do with any rational reason other than modernist ideology. So by growing, we also get a lot more media interest, and we are interviewed more about, from regular media. In this case, you can see we were interviewed by Bloomberg this autumn, where we can, show what we are about, that we are just ordinary citizens that want a beautiful built environment, or more or less we want to have a say about our built environment. That was all from me.
Thank you, Mikael. We have Noah.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. So my name is Noé Morin. I'm vice president of the association La Table Ronde de l'Architecture, which means the Round Table of Architecture, and which is also the Belgian chapter of the INBOW network. So in a few words, I'd like to describe the nature of our work and the intellectual and practical trajectory of our association. The Round Table of Architecture was founded in 2020 by Nadia Evrard, who can't be there tonight, unfortunately, architect by training, and myself. And to put it simply, we founded the association because we were alarmed by the disastrous architecture and urban trends in the city of Brussels, where we both lived. From the 60s onwards, the city of Brussels embarked on a race towards architecture modernism. Public authorities wiped out entire areas of the capital to transform them into business districts or administrative areas to house the European institutions, and they actually continue to do so. So we founded the Round Table of Architecture to give residents alternatives. Our first activity was to produce counter projects for all the major modernist projects in the city center. It gave residents the opportunity to express an opinion in terms of architecture style, building typology, height, density, mixed use, and so on. And the counter projects were voluntary and had to follow architectural criteria that the residents themselves had defined. So they were an undisputable success, but however, we soon realized that they were far from enough. For every victory, we had to face 10 defeats. Every time we succeeded in stopping or modifying a project, 10 others were born alongside. So that's why we came to the conclusion that in order to change architecture, we had to go back to the source. And the source is, of course, architecture education and, well, the university. In the vast majority of Belgian universities, the modernist dogma reigns supreme. Students receive only a very superficial knowledge of the history and forms of ancient architecture, which they are taught as a catalogue of styles. They are taken from the architecture of the Egyptians to that of the Greeks, Etruscans, and Romans, as if they were a set of images with no social, political, religious, or symbolic roots. So it therefore seemed to us that the most useful contribution that we could make to the traditional architecture was to found a counter-university whose mission would be to familiarize young people with traditional forms of architecture, focusing on the historical conditions of their emergence, their practical usefulness, their feasibility given the modern means of production, and the symbolic content that they convey. So to give you a concrete example, we have set up a summer school in Bruges, Belgium, as you can see on the two following slides, which is mainly based on the study over a 5-week period of Flemish Gothic architecture. So you will have pictures on the two slides that are, yeah. So we are not just we are studying Gothic architecture because it's the dominant architecture form locally, and but we are not just interested in Flemish Gothic for its unquestionable beauty, but we are trying to understand how this architecture was developed, by whom, according to what geometric processes, using what materials, using what craft techniques, and for what social purpose. We try to put ourselves in the shoes of our ancestors, whose concerns when building were not so different from ours. How much does it cost? Is it solid? Will it last? And will it prove useful? And at the end of the day, traditional architecture is in fact the true functionalist architecture because it is intelligent, solid, durable, useful, functional, profitable, and carries a symbolism that is known and recognized by all. On the other hand, modernist architecture is, in trying to go against the canons of traditional beauty, it actually falls into an exclusively aesthetic approach. And finally, on the next slide, you'll see some images of the articles that we regularly publish, mostly in French, but also in English, on architecture, city planning, and crafts, which you can read on our website. This research and writing activity takes up a growing proportion of our time, and it is set to increase still further in the future. I think it's important to constantly question the assumptions on which our opinions are based, to refine our arguments, to clarify our criticisms, and to deepen our knowledge of history. So yeah, so sorry, I hope I haven't been too long, and just mention that on the very last slide, you will find the contact details of the association La Table Ronde. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Noé. Next, we have Mario.
Yes, good evening, everybody. I just look at the watch and it's almost midnight in Finland, where I'm based. So I'm happy to be joining this very esteemed meeting, and I truly appreciate this opportunity for us to join forces with Notre Dame University and the Architectural Uprising community, because I think that we definitely have aligned objectives. We have so much to win together. My background is not in architecture, but in directing international networks, international strategic networks. But in 2015, right after Michael Diamant had founded the Uprising group in Sweden, I came across his marvelous work and was so impressed that we decided that there needs to be a sibling group also in Finland. So that's what happened in 2015, and I've enjoyed every day working for a better, more beautiful built environment in Finland and also internationally. So but starting with the Architectural Uprising as a Facebook group, it gave an opportunity to look into all the research that has been done for quite a while on what kind of surroundings, what kind of built environments have an effect on us as human beings, and what kind of environments have positive effects and what kind of environments have negative effects. And the evidence is so clear that there is no other way than move forward with the path that we're on. So I was also invited to become the founder of INTBAU activities in Finland in 2018. So for those of you who might not know, it's the International Network for Traditional Building, Architecture and Urbanism. So if you are not familiar with INTBAU, please join, because absolutely it's for you guys. Maybe next slide. So on the path, there became a chance to become an author. So about a year ago, we published with a couple of other Finnish enthusiasts, research from different fields. We published this book. It's unfortunately only in Finnish, but it translates as towards a more beautiful city. And that's something that I've been giving lectures now for the past year. And the next slide. And of course, all the surveys say that the majority of people, irrespective of gender, age, education, political views, the majority of us all prefer the kind of architecture, the kind of built environment that is typical of our traditional architecture, traditional classical urbanism. And this is just one example we have been doing in the Architectural Uprising groups. We have been doing in different countries these counter or alternative proposals for ugly buildings or ugly renderings. And this is just one recent examples from a quite big city in Finland called Tampere. As you can imagine, the picture or the rendering on the right is the one that was proposed by the building company, and it is being built right now. And the one on the left is the counter proposal of an architect member of the Architectural Uprising group in Finland. And the local newspaper made a poll, an opinion poll among their readers, asking which one would they prefer. And almost 100% of the readers of the local newspaper would prefer the other option, the one that was based on more classical, more traditional facade elements. So my question is, when the large majority is preferring something else than what's being built, we need to change this. And the next slide. I'm also on my path. I also realized that the cities or municipalities have the monopoly for land use and planning. So I became also active in the politics, and I'm currently one of the elected members of the city council of my hometown called Kaarina in Finland, and also the chair of the urban development committee. And it is quite an easy task to discuss the better built environments with politicians, irrespective of their political views, because this is a theme that is common to all, common to everyone, irrespective of the political views. So these renderings are the plans that we now have in Kaarina, what kind of new area we are planning. And you might see some references to one of the famous Finnish architects called Eliel Saarinen. So that's the path that we are trying to achieve here in Kaarina, at least. And the next slide, I truly hope the last slide just has my contact information. So anyone who's listening now, please connect in LinkedIn or in any other way. So there's still one slide, and that's my last one. But I'm happy to join the discussion and happy to be here. Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Next, we have Victoria.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here as well, and thanks for the others already who did their presentations. There are my slides. So this is a little bit skipping ahead. So I'm going to just introduce myself. My name is Victoria Schulz-Doba, and I'm working as an architect in England, but also doing a PhD on the sublime in architecture. And so I'm working for Apollodorus Architecture in London with Mark Wilson-Jones, as Lucia mentioned, and the PhD is at the King's Foundation in London. And apart from that, I'm also working for the Traditional Architecture Group in London, which is the British chapter of INPA. So INPA was mentioned before as well. So we're all connected still in that we're not a member of the uprising itself, but in a way I am, because it's all a little bit the same thing, I suppose. Yeah, so then this is about my PhD. This is taken from my PhD. It's a part of the project. So my PhD is about, as I said, about the sublime in classical architecture. And I'm looking at the sublime in philosophy. So for those of you who don't know it very well, the concept is, it's not very, very nice sublime in that sense, but in philosophy it was used as a concept or an idea to express something that is astonishing, a little bit breathtaking, awesome, and but also intriguing, maybe a little bit terrorizing in some respects, not always. And so there was lots of philosophy written about it. The first started in antiquity, and that first author, Longinus, just talked about the sublime as something featured in the writings of Homer, in the Ulysses. And so basically, for him, it's not so much connected to fear, but more to big ideas and epic ideas and things like that. And then we move forward to other philosophers like Edmund Burke, and those who Edmund Burke is most well known for the sublime as well, who wrote about this and in the context with aesthetics. And there he writes that it's most connected to power and terror. So this project here reflects his idea of the sublime the best. So this is a project that's all speculative and experimental, but it shows like a lightning harvesting structure meant to be in Paris, and it's all very polemic and over the top, but basically a project that would be so threatening that would literally harvest lightning, and then inside you would see it, and it would power a big light that would get so hot that there would be steam rising up. And I'll spare you the details, but it's one of those projects. And basically for every philosopher that I'm investigating, I'm doing one architectural proposal, and ultimately those findings that I collect during the PhD and during my travels as well will be all compiled in an architectural manual. And that manual, the idea is that manual can be then shared amongst architects of the movement and also other general classical architects and anyone who's interested in more beauty and sublime derived ideas in philosophy and architecture. That's it from me, I think. There's another slide. Sorry about the quality. Seems to be quite bad quality on the big screen, but yeah, those are all little pictures from snaps taken from inside the project. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Victoria. Next, we have Ruben Hansen.
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I'm Ruben, and I founded The Aesthetic City. And I will give a little bit of an oversight of, well, first of all, what I'm doing, but also my current thoughts about where we are with the Architectural Uprising, how The Aesthetic City is kind of cooperating and also influencing and, plays within that kind of movement. and also kind of a meta view about what is happening on the larger scale of things. Next slide, please. So a very short introduction, 32 years, studying, or actually 33 years, sorry, a year passed by. Studied urban planning at the University of Amsterdam and went to Delft for urbanism. Then through kind of an interesting way, I ended up starting the Aesthetic City not really liking what I learned at the Delft University of Technology. But now really, doing what I really like, and that's making these videos. Next slide, please. The channel, some of you might know already, which has been growing really rapidly with videos about, the last one is about the boundary, I believe. Next slide, please. So what I want to talk about is that we are now in a period of time where there is a huge opportunity, and that is that we have social media, we have internet, and for the first time in history, perhaps we can get around the gatekeeping institutions that were there before. Just imagine, how do you reach 100,000 people in the year 1970? You need to buy TV ads or newspaper ads or billboards, and now you can literally have a viral post on Instagram, like a reel or a video on YouTube, and reach millions. So that's an incredible opportunity. Of course, it can be used for good and bad, but still. And I feel that the status quo in architecture was defended simply by just sustaining practices, like on universities, like sustaining the same curriculum, having always the same stories in architectural magazines. Next slide, please. And now in the year 2024, already much earlier, the gates are wide open for new information to reach a wide audience. And that is also, I think, the reason why the Architectural Uprising has done so well, because finally, our ideas have been able to find a new audience. Next slide, please. And I feel that with all this new information, we can open the eyes of so many people to kind of the rationality and really the quality of these ideas. And this leads to a lot of people having first-time realizations, which are very strong. I mean, I was in the same boat, kind of. I went through a process to realize, hey, I'm not crazy, I'm not alone. Building beautifully is still possible and wished for, and building ugly is actually a choice. And especially that last one, that building ugly is a choice, can really enrage a lot of people if they discover, hey, it's an option to build beautifully. Next slide, please. And of course, people say, well, then you're just brainwashing. Well, no, because I believe that in an even playing field, and that's what's happened now with internet. The playing field has been evened. The ideas with the most merit will win, purely looking from a rational point of view. So, and looking at traditional architecture, most of these principles are based on sound logic. They're pro-human, they're sustainable, they're pragmatic. People love them, and we can prove that. So, they will win in this race of ideas. And simply showing the facts is convincing. It's not brainwashing. I think it's brainwashing when it's convincing people of things based on ideology, things that might not be true. So next slide, please. So I believe there's an uneven battle in this social media landscape, and it's in our favor, because anyone who defends something that is not popular with a wide public, with like 80% of the population, based on ideology instead of on facts, this person or institute or whatever is not going to have a lot of support, simply said. So, but still, we're not there yet. We have the burden of proof. We need to get people on board and show and prove that we can build more beautifully, how we can do that. So and that's where I think also my platform comes in a bit. Next slide, please. because I see my role as presenting these little known projects. Well, for us, they might be known, but for other people, they will definitely not be. Like Le Plaisir en Zon, which is a nice little place with a very inspiring story, which can really open people's eyes, but also thoughts and facts like myths about traditional architecture or certain materials or calling out fallacies. Yeah, an example is natural stone, which has a lot of misconceptions about this material. Well, maybe we can straighten these out. But there's countless of other ideas. Next slide, please. And another one is that I can inspire action with this wide audience. For example, the Uprising video was kind of a strategically planned video to show people what was happening in Sweden and Norway, and to show, hey, you can do this too, and it's what happened. So I think that's a good use of such a wide audience. And then a second example is perhaps doing the same with education. I'm planning on going to Notre Dame coming May, from May 2nd till May 6th, to meet people at the faculty, perhaps interview students to show the world, hey guys, if you're a student and you're frustrated and you're alone, well, please don't feel alone, because you are not alone and you're also not crazy. And there are places where people are teaching this, and maybe your university could change too. And I think that will be a very powerful message, and a lot of students might think, hey, I can do something with that. So I think that's a very powerful thing, which I can do with this platform. Next slide, please. So yeah, what the general idea is that my videos are kind of reasons or kind of arguments settled in a video. So if you have a dispute with someone and someone says, well, but we can't build with brick, I don't know, brick or stone or this or that, or it's too expensive, or it's not of our time. Well, then there's a video on my channel which you can just show, where we just go in depth in this thing, and it will be harder for them to keep it. Yeah, they'll have to move the goalposts again until there's no goalpost moving to be done anymore. So that's kind of the idea. So yeah, basically to support the grassroots movements like the Architectural Uprising, because everybody will have to go through these discussions at some point, and then it's good to have all the groundwork laid for you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so of course you need to double down on kind of the humaneness of this whole undertaking, because it's for everyone. It's bipartisan. I want wide support because it's for everyone. I want people to thrive. And if that's not a good thing, then I don't know what is. Of course, double down on good evidence, make sure everything is well reasoned, and create evergreen content that can be kept reusing. And I hope with that, someday we might hit to perhaps 1 million subscribers. That would be really awesome. So thank you. That's it for my next slide, please. My contact information is here. Feel free to contact me. Hope this has been somewhat educational for you.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Next up, we would have Colum and Catherine, but I don't think they're here with us. So I think we can leave this beautiful image up here before they switch up to our guest speakers on Zoom. This next segment is a round table, so I guess we can each ask a question. I'll start, and then I'll let Lucien ask one. So can I put on it? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So the first question I would ask is, we can see an increasing popularity.
Yeah. And Katrine? Do you hear me, Katrine? Hello. Hola. You have to unmute. You have to unmute your. Hello, hello. Right, you go.
It's a shame because they had beautiful images, and I think they had two projects that they done on their presentation. But
Can you hear us? Can you hear? And Katrine, can you hear us? But we can't hear you. So can you unmute? Can you unmute you?
Hello, yes.
Yeah. Well,
Hello, sorry. We had a technical difficulty over here, but
see, I'm still
Hello.
having one.
yes, we're still having one on the other computer.
Or I'll come and sit with you.
Hello, everyone. Apologies, we'll share a computer. Apologies to everyone. I got the maths wrong and thought it started an hour later than it did. Well, so I suppose if my slides up that I have time to present something, to introduce ourselves. Well, firstly, would like to thank the University of Notre Dame for inviting us to take part in this roundtable event. I think our contribution to this should be that of a traditional practitioner who has managed to build exclusively traditional and classical buildings for the last 35 years. It's always a pleasure to share the little knowledge and experience that I have with students and younger architects in the hope that it might be of some use to them. I came to Luxembourg in 1984 after finishing my studies at Queen's University in Belfast, and then at the Thames Polytechnic in London, although my real education only began when I started working for architects Harman and Valentini in Luxembourg. After a couple of years, then I started my own practice along with Lucien Steil in 1989. Anne-Catherine here joined me in early 2019 after a period when she was forced to work in modernist offices, and that after an equally torturous and modernist education at the University of Ulster in Belfast. We also had the immense privilege of working closely with Leon Creer, me for nearly 35 years, and Catherine since 2019. The finding of the Architectural Uprising probably represents one of the most important events to have taken place in the architectural scene since the Siam cruise, where a handful of self-interested individuals decided to impose architectural modernism on the citizens of the world. It's important because it has taken almost a century, and after a century, citizens have decided to stand up and show their disapproval for what has been imposed on them by an elitist profession that isn't concerned with citizens' interests or needs. The Architectural Uprising is not only demanding that architects do better, but they're also showing what's possible by publishing examples of good transformations and new build to show everyone that there is a real alternative to ugliness out there. A few years back, I read in an American study that only 4% of demolitions are due to structural problems. That means that 96% of demolitions could have been restoration or transformation projects. The main reason for demolition today are, firstly, if it's possible to build a larger volume on a site with an existing building on it. If the bottom line on an Excel spreadsheet shows any degree of profit, the existing building is condemned, regardless of its cultural or aesthetic value. And secondly, if the building has gone out of fashion or fallen into disrepair, the original choice of architectural style and of materials are therefore the problem. If the use of Portland cement and modernist architecture only became widespread in the 1930s, I think they're both responsible for the short lifespans of buildings since then. The present generations of architectural students know that they cannot have the luxury of demolishing and rebuilding every 20 or 30 years, as we have been doing for decades now. They must know that we must really start building for the future. And I don't mean building what architects today see as being the future they imagine. I mean buildings that will be standing 100 years from now. And that must mean learning the lessons from those buildings that have already lasted for many decades and even for centuries. When 100 or so years ago, modernists decided to reject the past, they expunged all traditional architectural elements from their work, thinking that they were merely ornamentation. For some strange reason, the first thing they eliminated was the roof. But in their ignorance, they were sure that everything they would build with the new materials and machinery at their fingertips would be superior to anything that their predecessors had built in the past. In their arrogance, they didn't realize that much of what they were discarding were actually technological elements that were there to protect the building's envelopes. Classical and traditional architects are not merely beautiful architectural styles. If they're beautiful, it's because over the centuries, talented artists and craftsmen improved them to make them beautiful. Traditional classical architecture are the expressions of technological solutions developed over centuries by our predecessors to provide shelter from local climates using local materials. Craftsmen copied and improved on each other's work, establishing a lasting building tradition, which provided every region in the world with its own local architectural heritage. Give the next slide, please. If we know that we will have to build buildings that last for generations, you might think that there will be less work for architects in the future. But as the Architectural Uprising has shown in many of its posts, there is so much of our built environment that needs to be corrected, transformed into desirable buildings that will make beautiful settlements for everyone to live in. Also, the preservation and repair of our existing heritage requires full knowledge of traditional architectural styles and materials. It should be every architect's responsibility to learn his own local vernacular and the techniques and materials needed to build and repair. Over the last 100 years, so much of our heritage has been disfigured or demolished altogether. And believe me, the job of putting things right is a passionate one. Next slide, please. Here are a few examples of buildings on which we have worked, just to showing what can be done. The artist who bought this house from his aunt asked us to transform and extend it for his own use. As it was not possible to add a volume in this UNESCO protected valley, we buried his new workshop in the upper garden and opened it into the living level. Next. The building had been destroyed during the 20th century by successive modifications. So all we could do was keep the 4 outer walls and start from scratch, using natural local materials. Many restorations are carried out using the wrong materials, or including modern details or modern elements which are added. And very often this can lead to the destruction of the building sometime later in the future. Next. The lawyer who owned this house asked us to improve the exterior, as he thought, without being able to put his finger on it, that something was not right. You can see the different degrees of improvements we suggested in the red on the drawing to the right. Left is the existing and the right, the changes we proposed to make. he asked us to do all of it. So next slide, please. Now you have the existing and what we did with it in the end. The existing wasn't bad, but he knew there was something could be better, and we gave him different degrees of improvements. Firstly, just adding wooden strips in the windows. If you look at the windows.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation, but we need to wrap it up to pass to
Great.
the
Okay.
Q&A.
Well, thank you very much for your
Thank
attention.
you.
Bye.
So the first question where I left off is popularity of the Architectural Uprising and its various chapters, as well as an increased interest in traditional and classical architecture. Although this has been taking place for a while, why do you think numerous academics and governing bodies continue to ignore this phenomenon? Whichever of you would like to start, Mikhail.
Well, it's simply they're ignoring it because they try to kill it by ignoring it. So they will ignore it until they cannot. They don't want to have this debate, because if they have this debate, they will lose. So that's why you can only debate them if they are forced to the debate table. So that's why they are ignoring it. That's why they continue to pretend, even here in Sweden, where we have been very successful, to pretend that it doesn't exist. Because if they acknowledge that it exists, they have to debate it, and they don't want to debate it.
I'd like to continue. This is a very important and interesting question. And also I've come across many times in the discussions with architects, with modernist architects, that they don't want and they don't have this tradition of discussing their work or discussing architecture with laymen, with non-architects. So it's like a profession with the best understanding of best architecture, and that's kind of the profession's own thing. It doesn't concern anyone else in the minds of the profession. So I think that's something that we have as Architectural Uprising, as a people's movement, as a grassroots bottom-up movement. We have tried, and also to some extent already been able to break this how would I say, this kind of arrogance from the architectural profession. And I think this is going to a better direction now, with the opening of the discussion that the built environments belongs to us all, not only to the profession.
Yes, if you don't mind, just in terms of how our message has been perceived, we've had quite good reception actually in the media, and also in the political spheres, which tend to have a good interest for architecture and urban topics, and are quite willing to listen to the traditional side. The main issue we've had is it really comes from the architecture institutions, namely the Order of the Architects and the university, with several attempts at censorship, and with no possibility of discussing anything with them. And we have come to realize that actually the reason why the university is so reluctant to discuss those issues and to open its doors to more traditional views is that the modernists from today, they are very different actually from the fathers of the modern movement, who were highly competent beings, architects, able to do both traditional and modern architecture. Whereas now you have architects, teachers mostly, who in most Belgian university who actually don't master the crafts, the rules, the job, and therefore they are doing modernism by default, by lack of being able to do anything else. So that's really, I think, the reason why this debate is so sensitive now at university.
Thank you. If anyone else would like to add, I think next question would be this.
Okay. So then you have the question. So I'm asking, how is architecture uprising go about typing up application offering alternative vision? So because hello. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I was it's easier to get the consensus in opposition than in bringing counter project. I know that the Table Ronde, they are doing a lot of counter project and they kind of have been a lot of impact. But I know it's kind of so my question is, how is the consensus created? Because you can have a consensus in opposing, but do you get the same easy consensus when you come with a vision where they have so many different views and likes and dislikes? And then how do we avoid the lower common denominator? How do we avoid that, the counter proposals of the traditional is not kind of going to become mediocre compromises, take traditionalism or history?
I don't know if I guess caught the question, but if they can hear me, no, if they can hear me, so I'll resume. So what Lucius asked was a couple of questions. Generally, so how do we avoid a lower common denominator? So how do we demand more quality, but simultaneously reaching a consensus within a wider audience, architects, politicians? Yeah. Yes, Mikael.
Yeah, there is already a wide consensus what is beautiful. Most people that hasn't gone to university has no problem telling what is beautiful and what is ugly. You have to study at university for 4 or 5 years, and then you become a relativist and can't tell what is beautiful and what is ugly. So there is already a consensus, and every poll that has been made about it shows it, that there is a very broad consensus what we find beautiful and what we find ugly. It's not that complicated. So just by showing simple examples, like have for every competition that there is, show for every competition, have at least 50% traditional proposals and 50% modernist proposals, and let there be some kind of general, pollster, what do people prefer? What do people prefer? And then you will see that there it is always a very, very resounding majority that prefer the traditional example.
I'd like to add to that. Yeah, first of all, that's a really good point, which Michael makes. But also, as long as we start having discussions about beauty again, and take the whole concept of beauty, for example, and what is popular and what is loved by, what is popular by a wide part of the population. As soon as we start having those discussions, we are already there, because now those discussions aren't even held, I feel. I mean, it's not happening in universities. Nobody's talking about beauty. Nobody dares to even touch the word, touch the concept. And I think that's, if we can establish that, then, well, we might not yet agree on what is beautiful, but at least the discussion is there, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think one of the biggest problem is, I also write about this in my PhD, is this subjectivity of beauty. So because everyone knows the phrase "beauty is in the eye of the beholder." Therefore, it seems almost like universities think it's subjective, and therefore we will just not address it at all. So even if it was subjective, which is to debate as well, but even if it was subjective, to cut it out completely it seems quite insane. And the same applies to the sublime in a way. I make a point in my PhD in one of the chapters where I say, where I found out that there was a big hype around beauty and the sublime. They're the same. They're along almost the same thing. They're two familiar concepts. So I'm just gonna talk about beauty as if it was the sublime in this case. So around the Enlightenment, it was a big buzzword, and beauty and the sublime were constantly in the back then media. So a lot of people were talking about them, philosophers, artists, and the like. And then there was a decline in that. And in the recent years, especially, the last maybe 50, 100 years or so, no one talks about the sublime, and very few people talk about beauty. And I think it's partly because they both glided into this sort of subjective but also difficult to quantify area, and because studies at university are so much about things you can prove and things you can back up with facts and you can reference and so on. You always have to reference everything, and so it's very difficult to then back it up scientifically. I think we're very obsessed with science and in things that are not measured by mathematics or science or so. And we can start to now look at beauty again with neuroscience and things like that with science, but maybe that's not even necessary. But all I'm trying to say is, I think because we can't quantify it, in recent years, we just tried to omit it altogether and acted like it's not even there. And as Ruben says, as long as we talk about it, that's already a huge step in the right direction.
So I think next question.
Yeah. Right, Richard Konomakis here. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I actually, when I sat down with my co-panelists, we had an agreed set of questions, which I think you have answered. It's a question with the degree to which attempts by political movements to hijack the architectural uprising have occurred, but perhaps we can get to that. But I wanted, since you're talking about beauty, I wanted to throw something out. You can take advantage of this very interesting discussion. One of the things that's constantly said to those of us who believe in beauty in architecture by architects who are modernistically inclined is that you must define beauty, you must define ugliness, and if you don't define it, you know, as Victoria said, it's subjective. We know that it's elusive. So the question to all of you is whether you think there is a writing, whether there is somewhere you can look to and point to the closest possible definition for architectural beauty. I'm going to simply say that there's the fascinating discussion by Dimitri Porphyrios in his book Classical Architecture, where he talks about beauty as being closely related to truth. What's true in something is what leads us to think of it as beautiful, right? And he points back to ancient texts. He says, you know, the beautiful shield of Athena, right, would make a terrible garbage can lid, be the ugliest lid. But it's beautiful as a shield, you know, that sort of thing. And what's true in architecture is the expression of tectonics. It's the expression of construction. And so we recognize a building as being beautiful because we recognize that it is being true to itself. It is being true to what it is meant to do. So I wanted to throw that out perhaps as another question, whether you think that's something that we could continue to pursue, or something that you've given some thought to.
I'm just going to add in, because that's a very interesting set of questions that would be a debate on its own. as we're running out of time, I would just ask for our guest speakers to do a quick fire on what you asked before we go to, so we still have time for the audience to do a small Q&A. Go right ahead, Colin.
You can quantify beauty and write books about it, but the appreciation of beauty is instant. It's in an instant when you look at something, you'd say they're beautiful or it's not beautiful. Whether it be a flower or a human being or a building. Of course, in order to produce beautiful buildings, you need to be able to quantify what it is that you find beautiful about it, so that you can reproduce maybe the details, the proportions, the tectonics and that of it. But the actual appreciation of beauty is instant. Problem with when you're debating beauty is anyone who has a great command of language can convince people that something that isn't beautiful is beautiful. And in architectural schools, and anyway, the school that I studied in, we spend most of our time trying to justify our projects, justify the things that we have done. So architects are well trained at being able to pass off the unacceptable as being acceptable.
Yes, if I may add something to the discussion, is that we, as part of our teaching at La Table Ronde, we do not. I mean, we are no authority to declare what is beautiful, to teach what is beautiful to the students. And I don't think it would be very convincing on our part to proceed in that way. Rather, what we try to teach them is that traditional styles, mostly, they were actually not intended to be beautiful. Like Flemish Gothic architecture was not mainly intended at being beautiful. It was based on very practical considerations, such as what is local materials, what is abundant locally, how can I implement it, how can I manage with the local bricks to do an arc, and it also, of course, pursued a very deep symbolic value. The Gothic was born out of the will to bring light into churches, because light was seen as a metaphor of God. So I don't think the way to proceed. I think with students is mostly to teach them how the ancients thought, and then they will make up their own mind and pick up what's of interest to them, rather than just imposing on them. Sorry for the cut. Imposing an ideal of beauty on them. Yeah.
Yes, and I'd like to add a few thoughts as well to all this well formulated and very good ideas. I think that, like Michael said, that for normal people, beauty is not a complicated subject. Beauty is in our every day, and it makes us happy. It's very much connected with the happiness in our hearts as human beings. And I find it really difficult sometimes to understand the theoretical concepts and theoretical ponderings of what is beautiful and how to define it, because it belongs to the human life. It's essential to humans. It doesn't have to be very theoretical, although theoretical is sometimes interesting. But something that we consider beautiful, it brings happiness to us, and something that we consider ugly creates negative emotions. So that's basically how to define it in plain terms. But also for many decades, it seems that beauty has not been an objective in architectural design. So I think that just to bring beauty back to the back to as one of the objectives of the architectural design would help a little bit. And also this consideration that we should require from new proposals or architectural competitions, we should require perhaps renderings both in modernistic languages, modernistic based languages, and traditional architectural languages. Maybe that would make it an even competition, because currently when we see architectural competitions, that you might have 400 proposals, but they all come from the modernistic language. So you don't actually have a choice then. Thank you.
Can I just say something? I normally it should be the audience now, but I just wanted to say, like, I often like to ask people, do you need to define peace to understand what peace is? And do you need to define love to understand what love is? And these are like given things which everybody understands without any data, without any scientific research. And I think beauty has, like, which has been mentioned, beauty has been instrumentalized just to eliminate beauty. I mean, the theory of beauty has been really created to evacuate it out of the aesthetic debate.
Yes, in a way, in a post-industrial time, everything that can be serialized or accounted for doesn't exist. I think, Ruben, if you can, in under 1 minute, say what you were going to say, because
I think it was already kind of covered by Lucien and also by Mario. I completely agree. It's some things are so kind of obvious and natural that why should there be any explanation for them? And that's a big problem in universities mostly. And that's also what I really am kind of annoyed with and hope to address with topics, videos, that sort of stuff. That's it.
Thank you. So does anyone in the audience, we have one in through Zoom, so I think if anyone in the audience would like to. So we'll just do the one on Zoom. Yeah.
The question is, how is uprising benefiting people trying to hijack their cause with especially television trying again and again to make mistakes?
So the question on Zoom, and I think you can see, is how is the Architectural Uprising dealing with certain groups, be it right-leaning, left-leaning, trying to hijack the movement for their benefit? Ruben, you can go ahead.
Okay. I think, well, just one aspect for personally, I just think for what I'm doing, for example, is just focusing it on goals that everybody should be able to agree with, like for everybody to flourish, for everybody to be healthy and live happy lives. And in that, really focus on language as well. So I don't know. It gets kind of hard when you talk about traditional architecture because the word tradition is kind of loaded in a way. But for me, it's about the principles underneath that tradition and not in the way that people see tradition, like, doing something in an age-old way. No, just looking at the principles that have worked, time-tested principles. So really make sure the language is that everybody can find themselves in the language. But for the other parts, of course, there's always the risk that people can share my videos, for example, and say like, hey, we support this and we are a right-wing party. Well, I can't really do anything about that, but Yeah, it's a good question. I think if they want to do that, but if as long as I stay neutral myself and I try to show and do show, I hope that this is for everyone and not just for some select group or anything, then I think well that's the furthest I can go myself. I hope that kind of makes sense.
As a moderator, I'm not sure I'm supposed to do this, but I'm going to intervene on this question because as I created the uprising in Portugal, and I manage it to this day, and we already have 8,000 members on the Facebook group and close to 1,000 on the Instagram page, and we never had to deal with political topics. Although architecture is always political, especially as more public the building is, it always has that weight. But this was never an issue because we in the architectural chapters have always agreed to remain neutral about it, unless it's a highly detrimental thing to the general public. You can go ahead, Mikael.
Well, the important thing is to always stress that we are bipartisan and that we represent a building tradition, not individual styles. Individual styles can have political leanings, but not the tradition itself. So by always stressing bipartisanship, and you win. And this is, something that is always used in the debate. They always try to label these movements as far right. And I think it's not a coincidence that many in the leadership, of these uprising movements have immigrant background because it's harder to label as far right than Nazi. In my case, I have to bring up my dead relatives all the time. On my mother's side, I'm Polish Jewish. So yes, it's not that we are hijacked, we are labeled far right more than we are hijacked by the far right. And so we have to stress, we have to bring up, show that we are apolitical. We are for a building tradition, not for individual styles.
We have one member in the audience.
Thank you. Hello, Richard. Vinayak Barne from Los Angeles. I work in your dean's office. So, first of all, wonderful discussion and nothing I can disagree with in general, but just a question for my education curiosity. As someone who was born in a much poorer part of the world, and since this discussion has touched upon the fact that this is not a provincial uprising, but a global concern, which I thought was very wonderful and good, I wonder if all of you could touch upon the issue of the relationship of beauty and circumstance, because not all societies are going through the same circumstances, as you know, which often leads to misconceptions and wrong framing. For example, I'll give two examples very quickly. Tokyo is a city I know very well. Most people who go to Tokyo think it's horrendous because it completely lacks the clarity of urban form as a Beaux-Arts city would have. But Tokyo has been built over and over again because it was destroyed again and again. Tokyo is a city built out of desperation. You go to the global south, there are crippling issues of urban poverty. So just to cite these as examples, I wonder if in this discussion you could touch upon how you see the process and the products of beauty in relation to critical circumstances.
That would be a question for our guests, right? The speakers. Did you hear the question? Was it clear to you? Right.
Everyone, Mikael, you can start, and then we can move on to Ruben.
Yeah, I understand the question, but building beautiful and traditional is the sustainable way, because what is happening now is that you build very unsustainable cities all over the developing world. It's also about the view of modernity. In much of the global south, they have been sold that vision that their traditional techniques are backwards, and have building these glass towers is a sign of progress. So it's also about selling the idea that your traditional techniques are worth something. The traditional buildings are worth something. They are solutions to your future problems. So it's also like an image problem. Many people, in Global South, they don't want the traditional buildings. They don't want traditional craftsmanship. They want plastic. They want glass and steel because it's a sign of progress. Much like we were in the Western world in the 1960s, when we rejected our traditions in favor of concrete towers, and viewed all these horrible suburbs as some kind of sign of progress. We realize now that this was a mistake. But in the Global South, they are still in the stage where they are, trying to understand, what progress is and what it means. And they have been sold the lie that progress means rejecting your tradition and building glass towers. So it's very hard to sell to them, like building traditional and building beautiful.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that also from a practical point of view, building traditionally, especially in places where there is an ample, there's ample resources to build with local materials, but those construction methods of building traditionally have been supplanted by modern Western imported building practices with concrete frames and reinforced concrete. Well, maybe literally there is stone on the site which you can literally build a building with. I'm following someone on Twitter or X. I think he's from not from Lebanon, from Jordan, and he builds locally with local stone, literally the stone that he finds on site. And then you have, of course, Hassan Fati from Egypt, who did the same kind of thinking work, like how can we empower local people to build with local materials and with an architecture that goes along with that. That leads to buildings that are more climate adapted to their area. So I think it goes perfectly hand in hand, even from a practical sense. But yeah, like Michael said, they've been sold the idea of what progress looks like.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with previous speakers, and I'd like to point out, for instance, within the INTBAU organization, INTBAU is working in about 40 countries, and one of them is, for instance, Bangladesh. And in Bangladesh, the leading figure in INTBAU Bangladesh is called Yasmin Lari, and she is the first female architect in Bangladesh. She has background in fabulous modernistic architecture, and she has found that that is a dead end. There is no future in continuing to design these elitistic, she calls it elitistic modernist buildings in Bangladesh. And she's doing great job now with the local communities to help them revive the traditional architectural building practices and so on. So if you're not familiar with INTBAU and let's say Yasmin Lari in Bangladesh, then you might want to look her up. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may add on the previous question, if you compare the post-war reconstruction made in most Belgian cities and northern French cities after the First World War, most reconstructions were at an identical state, reproducing exactly what was there before. Whereas a few decades later, after the Second World War, reconstructions were the occasion for modernist architects to play with new forms and what we know. So in between, I think that a mindset had changed. The circumstances were closely related, mostly the same, but the mind had changed, and that's why I wouldn't draw a direct connection between the type of architecture and the social or economical circumstances. We've been, as Nadia Evrard, the president of La Table Ronde, is a Tunisian national. We've been to Tunisia quite often, meeting the local authorities there. And actually, we've observed that the fact that they have less means financial means, and that the construction market is less standardized and integrated than in Europe, makes it easier for them to make traditional architecture at a cheaper price, since a large part of the population is doing self. I don't know how do you say auto construction. It's self construction. They are participating to the construction site, and they are therefore much more close to the result, the built result, which makes it actually easier to make traditional architecture. And even though circumstances there would seem less favorable.
As I said earlier, the widespread use of Portland cement and the modern architecture go hand in hand. They both became widespread around the same time, towards the end of the 1930s. And I think that they're both responsible for the fact that buildings don't last anymore. The traditional architecture is an expression of traditional methods.
I'm gonna have to interrupt
Right,
you.
sorry.
Because we're running short on time, and I think we could tackle one more question. And you could start by answering that question. I'm sorry.
Hi. It's been really nice to see the response from people of so many different countries to built work, to just the idea that traditional design can be feasible today. But what has the response been like within the academies in your respective countries? Have you been able to connect with current students, and what's that been like as an experience?
I started that one, I suppose. When you talk about academies, the architectural education is still very much a question of modernism. It's and any attempt by a student to propose some sort of traditional solution, or to use a traditional local style of architecture, is shunned and it's nipped in the bud. But the people coming out of universities and architectural schools then are exclusively modernist, and then because a lot of them end up in working as civil servants who control all of the building industry. Should it be in the restoration, the cité monument, the historic building people that we have to get authorizations of, always insist that we use modernism, and that it's shunned upon if we use any traditional detail at all, even if we're using the details that belong to the building itself. So in Luxembourg and in Europe in general, UK, everywhere, there's a bit of progress in the UK, but generally it's until younger students come out with a different mindset, the civil service in each country will make sure that modernism is predominant.
Yeah, I can add to that because I'm based in the UK. So as you were saying, there is some progress here, and there's one course of which I know at the Kingston University, where they have at least one studio that teaches classical architecture, and they come up with really, really remarkable designs all the time. And so since I work for the traditional architecture group, I also know that they have some prizes that they also give annually, and it's often the people from Kingston who win it. So that's a good way of knowing these things. And apart from that, it's true that it's still mostly modernist education, but I think everyone will agree here that one of the biggest things that the biggest ways to teach classical architecture and traditional architecture now is through summer schools, and that's how I found my way to classical architecture. And I think a lot of us are involved in summer schools, and and think that they're a really, really good thing, because that's just showing initiative, or the students show initiative in going there, and the teachers have much more freedom. They're not necessarily linked to an established institution, and people just go there and volunteer to go there, and the students are so motivated, and it's a really great way of teaching and spreading classical and traditional architecture.
Thank you so much. So we ran out of time. People have places to be. And we still had some more Q&A questions. Unfortunately, they only came out last minute. We could be here for another hour, but I wanna thank you. I wanna thank Notre Dame for having us all here. I want to thank you, Richard. I want to thank you, Lucia, and the members of the faculty that made all this possible, and our guest speakers as well for making themselves available, and some at very late hours of the night. Some places it's more than 5 hours of difference to us. And again, thank you all.